everybody like file in, see if I know
Yeah.
any of them.
All right. Well, it is 6:30, and I see that we are also streaming through YouTube. So great. Let's get started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second mini seminar on our series Climate Conscious NC. My name is Jenna Gant, and I am the Associate Program Manager for School Programs at the Museum of Life and Science in Durham, North Carolina, and I'll be hosting tonight's discussion. Our panelists, who will introduce themselves in just a moment, will discuss their climate and resilience work in rural and urban areas in North Carolina as they relate to extreme heat events, and how they believe the similarities and differences might affect public perception, values, and support for resilience, mitigation, and adaptation strategy. Before we get to that discussion, I want to take a moment to thank our partners, without whom this would not have been possible. The Ellerby Creek Watershed Association, SciStarter, the Museum of Science in Boston, Durham County Sustainability Office, IC Change, the Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, the Climate Change and Society Program at NC State, and of course, the North Carolina State Climate Office. I also want to note that this resource was prepared by the support of the award NA18SEC0080008 from the Environmental Literacy Program and the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration from the U.S. Department of Commerce. The statements, findings, and conclusions and recommendations are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of NOAA or the U.S. Department of Commerce. Climate Conscious NC is a 6-part series, and over the next few weeks, we'll continue these mini seminars, bringing on experts from a number of different disciplines and sectors to help us examine the lived experience of climate-related hazards here in our state. Then on September 10th, we'll host a public forum where you'll have an opportunity to reflect on these same hazards, your own perspectives, values, and experiences, and lend your voice to helping better understand public priorities regarding potential climate resilience and adaptation strategy and policy. Those conversations, we believe, may look similar to the model conversation that you'll hear tonight from our incredible panel. So we have a lot to consider this evening and not a lot of time as we'd like. So without further ado, I'd like to return it over to our wonderful moderator, Dr. Robert Mira, and our panelists. Oh, Dr. Mira, you're muted.
Of course I'm muted. So let me get back to what I was saying. Thank you, Jenna. I'm delighted to be joining you in this webinar. Many thanks for having me provide the moderator role today. I want to share a little bit more about me and our Climate Change Society program at NC State. My background is actually in extreme event attribution, including extreme heat, which is why I'm so excited about today's timely topic. About the program, we are a 1-year master's program that is mostly course-based. The program includes a capstone project where we match you with a mentor of your choosing for the field of choice that you are most interested in. The program is actually multidisciplinary in nature, and our required courses span many different disciplines. So now let's actually go ahead and get started with the questions. Let me put here. Okay. So first of all, we might broadly understand that in summer, it feels hot. It can be harder to understand what the difference between a hot day in summer and an extreme heat event look like and feel like. What does an extreme heat event look or feel like to you and the communities you serve? What is the lived experience of extreme heat in areas that you live and work in? And I'm going to go around and first kind of have everyone introduce each other. Shouldn't have gone that far. Tara May, want to take it?
Sure. Hi, I'm Tara May Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Extraterrestrial Projects. We're a 501c3 that's focused on sustainable catalytic change in cities. And in this last year, I've had a fellowship at ASU in Tempe, Arizona, near Phoenix, thinking about their climate adaptation and green infrastructure plans. And I'm really excited to be working on Durham's new climate health assessment, considering extreme heat.
Lauren?
Good evening. I'm Lauren Thie, and I manage the North Carolina Climate and Health Program at the State Health Department.
Diana?
Good evening, I'm Diana Rashash. I'm with North Carolina Cooperative Extension. I'm down in the Southeast counties and I deal with water issues.
Katie Rose?
I am Katie Rose. I'm the Executive Director of Trees Durham. We address climate change by working to make our tree canopy more healthy, sustainable, and socially just.
Great. So go back to what I was saying earlier. What does an extreme heat event look like or feel like to you and the communities you serve? What is the lived experience of extreme heat in the areas you live and work in? How about we get us started with Tara May?
So I love the idea that extreme heat is kind of like a silent storm. We all know what it feels like when you have a heat wave and you just get like really slow and you don't want to move. So normally that lasts maybe 3 days. And so I think we're trying to imagine like, what would that be like if that extreme heat lasted for a month and a half? You had a month and a half of over 100-degree weather. I think we all know what that feels like in North Carolina for a couple of days, but over time it really adds up.
Lauren?
So extreme heat affects North Carolinians in urban areas like Durham and also in rural areas. You know, heat illness we know increases around 80 degrees in North Carolina. So a lot of the exposures we're concerned about are with people who just can't avoid it, being exposed to the heat on any day above 80 degrees, including the more extreme heat events. So for us, we're particularly concerned about people working outside, low income earners who may not be able to afford adequate cooling, those with chronic conditions, and older adults.
Right. Diana?
I agree with Lauren quite a bit on the issues that people face. You know, it's hard to think about it sometimes, but when you think of people working on road construction, contractors working on roofs on top of homes where it's really hot up there, our agricultural workers out in the fields, they all have issues and cannot get in to cool off or necessarily drink as much water as they should. And so drinking water is definitely an issue, and not just water, because you drink too much, you lose all your electrolytes. You're trying to make sure you have other things besides that water so that you stay healthy. And if you have a chance to actually get into a cool area every once in a while.
Katie Rose?
Yeah, so Lauren referenced people who are vulnerable to heat. We do a lot of tree plantings at schools because a lot of public schools have playgrounds that don't have shade. And so it's too hot for the kids to play. And a lot of our kids, particularly ones who come from low-income neighborhoods or live beside highways, have asthma. And so the hotter it is, the less they can play. And you get this situation where a lot of kids are just cooped up all day. So for them, extreme heat just means really not being able to focus at school, not being able to play. And that causes a whole cascade of impacts. So for the people that I work with, extreme heat is a daily frustration. It can be deadly, but it can also just really reduce their quality of life and their ability to learn and focus and just be a kid.
Well, let's stick with you. Why should I care about extreme heat if I can go outside and put on the air conditioning? I mean, inside and put on the air conditioning. Does it just mean a few more warm days in the summer? What implications does this have for folks like me that are able to stay indoors?
Yeah. So just because you're able to stay indoors doesn't mean you want to have to stay indoors, right? So all of us have to go out grocery shopping, or perhaps you need to go to the pharmacy and pick up medication, or you just want to go out walking through parking lots that are, 10 degrees hotter than the outside world. So if it's now extreme heat, it's 99 degrees. Those parking lots are going to be 109 or more. It's actually really damaging to your tissue, to your body. And so we're not even, so forget your neighbors who can't afford, air conditioning, and forget your kids who can't play outside, but just for your own ability to move around and interact in your community, it can be dangerous or deadly even for short term for you.
Diana, what do you think?
Well, there's a lot more issues with the heat than besides on the human impact, the direct human impact. There's the agricultural impact where when the temperature gets hot enough, various of our crops stop producing. So, corn, tomatoes, other things along those lines. There's also the issue with water because you use more water. And if that heat is occurring during a drought period, people want to be watering their lawns, playing in the water outside, using more water. Then we could end up with issues with what our reservoirs levels doing. And then there's the thermal pollution because you've got all that hot pavement. If we do have a rainstorm, the runoff water gets heated up and goes into our waterways, and hot water does not carry as much oxygen as cold water. So then you have the stress on our aquatic systems as well. So there's a lot of different impacts from the heat that occurs.
Tara May works a lot with native plants and like how that might affect those communities, don't you?
Yes, want to take that, Tara May?
Yeah, so I do. We have planted a Carolina xeriscape in downtown Durham. So has over 80 species of climate adapted plants, never been watered. And so the whole idea of that is getting them ready for these extreme heat events. A lot of the green infrastructure we have maybe is mimicking like a tropical garden or a English garden, and those plants aren't well adapted to extreme heat days. So it's something to really think about in terms of infrastructure. One thing I wanted to say that's really important when you're thinking about, I mentioned a silent storm before, is that the NOAA looked at all the US fatalities by different kinds of hazards, tornadoes, hurricanes, flooding, all these things that we're really scared about and spent a lot of money mitigating. And they found between 2006 and 2015, extreme heat caused the most deaths, more than all of those different hazards combined. And so I guess that's why we're all really concerned about it. It's not something we normally think of top of mind, but it is more deadly than a hurricane. And we all know that we spend a lot of energy to avoid that. And one thing I just want to mention when we're thinking about what that actually means is that 85%, at least from data we have right now, of those deaths happen indoors. So when we're going inside, it's air conditioned, but maybe there's a brownout, or maybe you can't afford to pay your air conditioning bill anymore. And maybe you just want to stay inside because you feel really lethargic. It can be 20 degrees hotter inside than outside. And so, you're an older grandma or you have some kind of pre-existing condition, that could be very deadly. And so it's just something to put on your radar.
Lauren?
Well, I think Katie Rose and Tara May and Diana all did a good job of mentioning food and crops and plants, and definitely the food we eat and the products we use in North Carolina are often a result of workers, including children, who are laboring in the heat on our behalf. So for example, cucumbers are a crop that must be picked kind of immediately, and there's no way to kind of move that earlier in the day or later in the day. When the cucumber's ready, you have to harvest it. And I think also Katie Rose mentioned that we all experience this extreme heat, even if you kind of have these air conditioned car and house and workplace you move between. Anyone can get sick from heat related illness. And actually the longer you spend in air conditioning, you can also that can result in you being more at risk from heat related illness. So I like to tell people that, the amount of time I spend in air conditioning actually makes me less acclimated to the heat. And then also just remembering like your family and friends and neighbors. So even if you have a safe place, you might have people in your life who don't. And so you can educate others about the risk of heat to farm workers and check on your family and friends and neighbors who might be more vulnerable than you.
Lauren, I have a quick question for you on that. So is it the shock of going from 72-degree air inside to 95-degree air outside that causes some of that stress on a person's body when they switch back and forth?
Perhaps. I know that the research on occupational exposures to heat shows that the people most likely to die from heat-related illness, and recent research on the job comes from people who either are new to the job or have been out for a while with an illness and return. So it takes the body on average 14 days to adjust to heat of any kind of level. And so during that time, people are particularly vulnerable. So you can imagine if you spend all your time in air conditioning and then decide on a July day to go outside and do a bunch of gardening, that your body has not had a 2-week period to adjust to a large amount of exertion outside. And so that particularly plays out on the occupation, but can affect anybody outside doing yard work. When I look at emergency department visits from heat-related illness weekly during the summer, a tremendous number of them say yard work. And I assume that some of those people actually are doing yard work for a way to earn an income. But likely some of those people are just folks who decided, Saturday at noon when it's 90, even though I've been in my air conditioning all summer, I'm going to do the yard work then, so everybody can be at risk.
That's fascinating. I have a kind of a different question for you guys. So in my work, I have seen that the biggest signal in the temperature is at night. So all of even your lowest temperatures, they're no longer that low. They're like 2 degrees above, 2 degrees Celsius, so that's 4 degrees Fahrenheit above what they used to be. And we keep on setting records for the highest low temperature. So what is your perspective on these facts? Tara May, I'll get started with you.
Yeah, so I think because I'm thinking on cities, so cities, I guess to your point, that's an issue, could be up to 22 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than rural areas. And that's because a lot of the building materials hold on to the heat, and also kind of the microclimates from getting rid of like evapotranspiration from trees and other green things on the ground. So I agree that I've heard that a good indicator is the nighttime temperature. That's not my specialty though, so I guess I could pass it to someone else. But I think there's more data we need to collect, but I think there's a really clear case for some immediate actions we can take without even knowing that. We sort of know who's most vulnerable at this moment to extreme heat strokes just by looking at who can't pay their electricity bill, or who maybe for whatever reason has a pre-existing condition. So I think that's something I'm interested in, but I guess I've been focusing more on the data that we have that exists. What about Lauren or Diana? Do either of you work with data like that?
One of my coworkers is Kathy Dello with the State Climate Office, and she was gracious enough to send me a graph that showed the minimum temperatures for the year, but also grouped by season. So the June, July, August nighttime temperature, like Robert said, it is definitely quite a bit higher than it has been in the past. So for the last 20 years, we've been above the long-term average minimum. So we're warmer. We just had a winter where we had more 70-degree days down here than we had days below 32, which impacts what's able to overwinter pest-wise, which causes problems in the summer when we're all dealing with the various pest issues and trying to keep them at bay somewhat. But it also impacts your ability to de-stress from the heat. If you're depending on being able to open your windows up and getting a cool breeze, if you don't have a cool breeze, that's not going to be helping you. So that nighttime temperature adds not only stress to you, but it adds stress to your livestock, stress to your crops, and stress to your pets as well, because everybody's hoping for a cool evening.
Lauren?
Yeah, I'll just add real quick that I've heard some examples from colleagues that work with farm workers in North Carolina of where the housing they're in is not cooled at night. So they work outside, and then at night, and I've also heard from people who live in mobile homes that sometimes in the summer, if you can't run your cooling, it can be cooler for the workers, like for farm workers to actually sleep outside than the housing they're given from farmers, or like it can be cooler outside your mobile home than in it. So it's not hard to imagine that there might be some, neighbors, I live in Durham here, that are doing something like landscaping or delivering mail all day, then can't afford to cool. And with Tara May bringing up that a city can be 22 degrees hotter than the surrounding rural area, how difficult it must be, because we do know a few hours a day in a cool space is very protective for your health. Not probably the amount of time I spend inside during the summer, but a few hours a day. So it's really important for people to be able to cool off at night.
I would
Katie Rose?
Yeah, I would build a little bit on what Diana had said about pests not being killed. You know, winter freezes really knock back things like ticks and mosquitoes. So without those cool temperatures, we humans, even particularly in suburban areas, are more exposed to diseases like Lyme's disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, rickettsiosis, and other types of like really virulent um, pathogen-borne diseases. So like those cooler nights really do make an impact on our physical health. And then from a tree standpoint, trees kind of sleep and they really depend on those cooler temperatures to slow down. And when it's so hot, they just stay awake and they burn a lot of energy. And that also makes them more susceptible to pests and diseases. So the warmer nights that we have, particularly during the winter, the more energy trees burn and the less able they are to fight off impacts from drought, impacts from heat, impacts from fungus. So it really weakens our trees in general. And we were talking about hurricanes, it can make them more susceptible to falling over in hurricanes. So it all contributes, cool nights and cooler temperatures really contribute to the health of your trees, the health of you.
And it's not just the summertime ones either. It's the year-round nighttime lows.
That's exactly right, Dana. It's particularly the winter lows make a huge impact. It's one of the reasons why all the mountain beetles are so bad out in Colorado.
Okay. What do you guys think? What a sort of intersecting ramifications does extreme heat have in terms of public infrastructure, the economy, and public health? Want to start with you, Diana?
Oh, when I think of the infrastructure, I think what's going on out in California right now with the rolling blackouts, as well as the wildfire situation. So everybody's trying to run their air conditioning and using a lot of electricity. And when the grid goes down, nobody has it. So that becomes under stress, and our system is just as likely or has great potential to have a stressful time if too many people are trying to use too much electricity as well.
Lauren?
So as I mentioned before, on days above 80 degrees, we know that heat-related illness starts increasing in North Carolina. And so the more days we have at that level, like currently we have plenty of those days. And then by 2050, we expect additional 2 to 3 days above 95. 2 to 3 weeks of days above 95 degrees in North Carolina. And this affects the food we eat, the products we use, low income earners, and those people with conditions like diabetes. And, I think Diana mentioned the power outages. Those are something I see every summer in the news in North Carolina, from Fayetteville, from various cities across the state. Haven't heard any on Durham, but I'd be shocked if it doesn't happen here in Durham. So extreme heat and summers in North Carolina impact like basically every aspect of life. Sleep, if you're in a space that's not cooled at night, it's more difficult to sleep. I've read stories of like visiting with families. So one father on Father's Day having his whole family over to his living room to kind of honor him as a father and spend time together, and how uncomfortable everybody was because he couldn't afford to cool the space, and how his kids and grandkids kind of like wanted to go home. So it can affect like cultural and family get-togethers. It affects the housing you're in, and some people can only afford to cool like one room. So you can imagine how competitive like one room of a mobile home or some type of like home might become versus where you might normally sleep. It can affect your job, and then also transportation. So people who rely on active transport to get from place to place are really impacted during the summer.
Katie Rose?
And I think that maybe I would talk a little bit about like mitigation.
Yeah, actually, that's a good idea. Let's talk about what we can do about it.
Yeah, and so I'm a tree person, so planting trees is really helpful, and maintaining the trees you have. And sort of back to Tara May's thing, it can be up to 20 degrees cooler underneath the shade of a large tree. It makes a significant impact on your electricity bills, on your home temperatures, on your surrounding area to have a tree, particularly a really big tree on the south or southwest part of your house. And then making sure to advocate for trees and forests to be preserved during construction. that's something you can do, is talk to your city officials, because they are just such a wonderful piece of climate change technology. You know, they sequester carbon, they cool the air, they help stop flooding. So that's something that you go out and plant a tree that, you know, not today because it's too hot, but in the fall, that would make a really big impact.
Tara May?
Yes, so we're seeing the impact of something like COVID on the economy. So heat, imagine sort of everything grinding to the halt, similar impact. This is coming to us, so we need to start preparing. And then on top of that, add, you know, another kind of pandemic or Zika mosquitoes or something. So that's definitely an issue to think about. But I think in terms of thinking about what you can do, there are a lot of things that center around people and places. So how are you going to cool people and how are you going to cool places? And they're not always the same thing. So sometimes people are displaced, maybe because of gentrification or different reasons. So you need to make sure that you're not just investing in places, because the people could be moving from there, but also you can't just invest in people, because the places are the things that are holding extra heat, especially in cities. So I'm sure Diana and Lauren have a lot of things to say about that, but I think that's, to me, the most important thing is we're thinking about infrastructure, physical infrastructure that's cooling. We're also thinking about social infrastructure. So like grandma isn't left at home or has a buddy when it's really hot. I'd love to hear what Lauren and Diana think.
I can jump in.
Yes.
I think that I really appreciate Tara May and Katie Rose thinking about what people can do, because there are some proven things you can do around heat to protect people's health. I do like to start with telling people, just start to notice in your community who's outside on hot days. And I think that can tie in both what Tara May is saying about both the people and the places. Like, you know, if you're seeing people who are using walking to get from place to place, walking outside on a street where there's no trees, that seems like a particularly rough heat island aspect of Durham. You can notice that. And then also considering the people you can't see. So like the cucumber you're eating, did a farm worker harvest that in the heat? Or is there a 75-year-old in your community who maybe is earning a low income that you can't see or that you don't know? When it comes to evidence-based things, we know we can do. One particular intervention we do in North Carolina is around heat health alert systems. So this is warning particular populations, usually about risk to their health from heat at temperatures that we know are affecting them. And then I also just like to mention that the National Institute on Occupational Safety and Health has now 3 times recommended to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to adopt a heat stress standard to protect workers from heat. So we know that this is a policy that's been enacted in other states. They're not yet adopted at a federal level that can really work to protect people outside in the heat for their jobs.
Well, I have a quick one, but believe it or not, protect your heat pump. So if you can't shade your yard, at least try to plant something around your heat pump that will shade it, whether it's a shorter tree that has enough canopy, because that will cool the air that the heat pump is bringing in to try to cool your house. And if it has to work less to be able to do that, it's under less stress, and it's also better for your electric bill, which is better for your pocket, and it's also good for the grid.
Any final thoughts, Diana?
Protecting your heat pump is one. So trying to shade it, but with what Katie mentioned with the trees, making sure it's the proper tree. We do have some trees in the state that are very popular, but they're also very brittle, and they are not good trees to plant where you're going to have wind situations. So the right tree in the right place.
Katie Rose, final thoughts?
Yeah, I would say use so many options for combating heat, whether it's like Tara May said, inviting friends or family over to a cool space with you, or asking the city to provide cool space, planting trees yourself, or asking the city to preserve better trees. And like Diana said, there's a lot of great resources to get the right tree at the right place. There's stuff online. The North Carolina Urban Forestry Council has a really nice list. So I would say you have the power, and just sort of taking that, whatever level you're at, you can make a huge difference.
Tara May?
I agree that you could talk to your municipality about cooling stations and providing some kind of special rebate or some kind of program for people that can't afford AC. I think secondly, something to start to think about is maximum temperature law. So we have a minimum temperature law in North Carolina. Municipalities can say 68, you must provide heat at 68 degrees. well, you can have a maximum temperature. You must provide cooling at, whatever I don't know what the degree would be, 85 degrees, for example. So I think those are things that you can do. And then, of course, plant green infrastructure. It's so cooling.
Lauren, what do you think?
I love the options offered by the other panelists. And I do just want to mention, if people are feeling passionate about this topic, that there's two really active organizations in North Carolina. One is here local in Durham, Student Actions with Farm Workers. They provide valuable information about threats to farm workers from a variety of topics, including heat and actions that can be taken to help protect farm workers in the state. And also the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, which provides a lot of wisdom and actions on how you can best support citizens in Durham and across the state who are experiencing vulnerability to a variety of environmental exposures. And I was wondering, I know there's been a bunch of questions in here. Will there be an opportunity for us to like maybe respond to those after today's webinar? Just out of curiosity, I should have asked that ahead.
Yes, I think so. There will be an opportunity for you all to answer those questions that we got in our Q&A section. And thank you guys so much for this wonderful conversation that we had this evening. Another goal of this project that you'll hopefully learn about as the project progresses is to move folks towards continuing the conversation and towards participating in the science that helps us better understand these climate-related hazards. To that end, you can visit scistarter.org/NOAA Life and Science to find some associated projects that will help us better understand sea level rise, or excuse me, extreme heat events, including icy change. So we hope you join us next week on August 27th to talk about drought. Thank you guys again for joining us this evening, and I hope you guys have a great night.